What up, world history? This is Mr. View, and I'm back for another lecture. All right, yesterday, if you remember, we learned about France and how they wanted some of the same things that were going on in England. They had three estates. The first estate was the clergy, the church people. The second estate were the nobles, the rich guys with titles. And then the third estate was the common people, and that was 98% of the population, and they were really unhappy, right? They didn't have hunting rights. They had to pay all the taxes, and sometimes they had to work for free on roads and bridges and things. They did not get a say that was equal to everybody else, and they got stuck with all the bad parts. So they started to kind of revolt a little bit. They attacked this French prison called the Bastille on July 14th, and that became their Independence Day, right? So things are changing in France. Prior to that, the day before that, we learned about England and how they wanted a constitutional or had a constitutional government that limits laws and rights based on a constitution. And they also had a prime minister, which is similar to our president, except they didn't have term limits. The day before that, we learned about the Enlightenment, and that is the age of reason, where some people believe that people were born bad, some people were born good, and then some people thought that people were born a blank slate of paper, and that they were affected by or corrupted by the unequal distribution of wealth. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, right? So that's what we've learned so far. Today we're staying in Vive la France, and we're going to learn a little bit more. That revolution is in full effect, and they see this young burgeoning country across the pond, the United States, that has just come about, and they have a constitution, and so France wants the same type of thing. So they still want that constitution. Remember, the third estate had met at the tennis court oath, and decided we are not going to stop until we get a constitution. So they're still struggling for that. And then on top of all this inequality, famine strikes. So in France, a lot of people are starving, and that cannot happen, right? So when this starts to happen, the peasants kind of strike out against the nobles and start taking their stuff. And there's this great fear, this panic. The nobles attacking the peasants attacking the nobles. So it's kind of a wealth war, if you will. The rich guys over here and the poor guys over here. But the poor guys have 98% of the population. So you can't figure it's going to go well for those rich guys, right? And it doesn't. So the peasants kind of win this little battle, I guess it wasn't really a war, but all these little infights, they win and they gain hunting rights. And now the nobles have to pay taxes. So some equality is given to these poorer people, the 98%. And they're not all poor. Don't get me wrong here. You got doctors and lawyers and things like that in there too. So it was just the people without titles. So the great fear, the peasants gain some rights from the nobles, and that's a good thing. But the peasants are not happy, right? They still are fighting. They want this constitution and things. They get the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is very similar to our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. They say that they are born free. They have the right to life, liberty, and security. And the taxes are based on the ability to pay. So you can't make somebody pay a bunch of taxes if they don't have that ability, right? And then also the rich people have to pay based on their ability. So they might have a little bit higher taxes, right? Because they're making more money or have more to give. The king and queen, King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, two very, 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 very famous individuals. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette lived very lavishly. They lived at the Palace of Versailles, which you probably learned about earlier. Humongous palace. It was awesome. They had a ton of fountains and cool stuff there. But Marie Antoinette, she was young and she liked to like live lavishly like a queen should, right? But she also had this village created at Versailles. And it was a peasant village, so she could kind of play poor. And the people did not like that a lot. They also heard that when Marie Antoinette found out that the people were starving and couldn't afford bread, she said, let them eat cake. In reality, she didn't say that. but it showed that she was really out of touch with the common people, because obviously, if they can't afford bread, they can't afford cake. So the people really didn't like Marie Antoinette, right? While they were living at Versailles, the women in Paris marched there. The common women marched to the Palace of Versailles, and they're at the gates, and they're basically demanding that the king and queen go to Paris to see how the people are living and starving. And eventually, the king and queen do. They go back to Paris. Now, they're not living in jail. They're not living in a common house. They have a palace in Paris. So it's not like it's a big deal. But they are stuck there. They can't leave. They're not, the common people aren't letting them leave. Well, that doesn't sit well with the king. So the king decides, hey, we're going to get out of here, right? Things are not going real well in our own country. Let's get out of Paris. And so they throw on some disguises, jump in a carriage, and away they go. And here they are in this carriage, right? And there's the horse. It's a pretty nice horse. But somebody stops them. And when they stop, it's probably because the kid needed to go to the bathroom or something. They stop. And this guy holds up some money and he says, hey, wait a second. This looks like you. You're the king and you're trying to escape. And he's like, no. But it was him. And so they get marched back to Paris. They try to escape, no luck, right? So they are thrown on trial. And when they're put on trial, they're both found guilty of being traitors. And they're both beheaded in the guillotine. First, King Louis, and then second, Marie Antoinette. And I guess she dies with grace, but wow. Yeah, they chop off her head. Well, bam! Right? The kid, their son, dies in prison a few years later. But now there's no king and queen. And the Committee of Public Safety in France is kind of running things. This guy with one of the great names of all time, Maximilien Robespierre. Go ahead and say it. Yeah, Maximilien Robespierre. It's fun. He's the guy in charge. And he basically says, anybody that's against the Constitution or democracy or things like that, we are going to kill them. And so they put a bunch of people on trial. They killed 40,000 people in a year. I'm no mathematician. 365 days, 40,000. Over 100 a day, they were chopping off their heads or executing. That's a lot of people to kill, right? Eventually, people get afraid of Robespierre within his own group, and he's thrown on trial, and he's executed by the guillotine too. Suffrage was extended to all males. Suffrage is the right to vote. What's suffrage? That's right, the right to vote. And it was extended to all males, not just people who own property. So that's a big win for the common or the poor people. So now men can vote. Although that's not real fair with women, right? It's very misogynistic. That means anti-female. A person who had a problem with that was Olympe de Gouges. Another fun name, Olympe de Gouges. She wrote Declaration of the Rights of Women. And she said women should have the right to vote. And she's speaking out about different things. Well, somebody thought that wasn't right. And so Olympe de Gouges lost her head too. All right, so this is the French Revolution. This is stuff going on, right? We learned about Charles being the first king with his execution, lose his head by trial back in England. Well, now we've got Louis and Marie Antoinette both getting killed by their own people. So things are changing in Europe and that way the world. So to sum up, France, the people still wanted a constitution. It got worse when famine struck and the peasants and nobles fought. The peasants came out on top. They won hunting rights and reduction in taxes. The taxes were now paid by the nobles as well. The Declaration of the Rights of Man came out, so that said that they were born free and they had the right to life, liberty, and security. Louis and Marie Antoinette were the king and queen of France. They were not very popular. They lived very lavishly while some people were starving and dying. And so they were forced to live in Paris, where they tried to escape, but were captured, thrown on trial, and then bam, lost their head in the guillotine. The Committee of Public Safety started to run France. A guy named Robespierre led the Reign of Terror, in which 40,000 people were executed in a year. Eventually, Robespierre himself was killed. Suffrage was extended to all males. That's the right to vote. Olympe de Gouges wanted it for women also, but she was executed. And that's a summary of today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will talk to you again tomorrow. See ya.